What happens when one of the world's largest mammals needs to be protected from mankind? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is naturalist James Michael Dorsey. We're going to talk about protecting the gray whales. It all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and now we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, it is Guys Radio and Guys TV. This is the interview portion of our show, and today we're going to talk about gray whales. My special guest, his name is James Michael Dorsey. He's written a terrific book called The Lagoon, Encounters with the Whales of San Ignacio in the Baja, California. And it's a fantastic story because I didn't know very much about whales, and now I know a lot more about them based on James's book, and he's an interesting guy too. He's an award-winning author, explorer. He's traveled 56 countries to visit different cultures before they vanish. And when not in remote locales, he's on the water working as a cetacean naturalist. He's written on for Lonely Planet, BBC Travel, BBC Wildlife, so much more. He's got a last book was called Vanishing Tales from Ancient Trails, and his new book, Baboons for Lunch, was published in the spring of 2018. And the latest book that we're going to talk about now is called, once again, The Lagoon, Encounters with the Whales of San Ignacio. Welcome to Guys Radio, James Michael Dorsey.
Thank you, Robert. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, let's start by at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about, who you are and your work, because you have a very different lifestyle and very different line of work than so many of our audience does, and me also. So I found it fascinating to read about you and also about the whales.
Yeah, I've always pursued two separate career paths. I travel to remote parts of the world, and I write personal narratives about vanishing cultures, especially those that have no written language. And at the same time, I work as a cetacean naturalist. I've worked on whale boats all over California, South and Central. But I spent 22 years working in the gray whale nursery in southern Baja, on the water, interacting with these animals. And I've come to know them as very few people on this world can. So that's why I wrote the book. I want to educate people because commercial whaling is coming to an end worldwide and slowly winding down. And I've been very involved in that ever since way back in the original Blackfish movement that started all this. So I'm very happy to be able to come and speak to people about this and try and educate them about these wonderful animals that share our planet, because they are fellow sentient beings.
Now, what drew you initially to study whales and gray whales in particular? And as part of that, if you could, James, give us, our listeners and viewers, a little bit of a background of the different types of whales, because I'm not sure if most folks know how to differentiate different types of whales. The gray whale would be like a Moby Dick whale, right? But
Moby Dick was a sperm whale.
Okay, so there we go.
Gray whales are there's about little over 80 species of whales in the world. Gray whales right now pretty much are only on the west coast of the Americas. 18 to 22,000 of them roughly. They migrate from north of Alaska and the Bering and Chukchi Seas down to the lagoons in southern Baja, but not all of them migrate. Anyway, they are the only whale that really hugs the shore. So the fascinating thing about them is that 150 years ago, they were being hunted ruthlessly, and this only ended roughly 1950. And once they stopped being hunted, they came to us in friendship. We almost wiped them out, and tells me they've always been friendly creatures. We just never gave them a chance until recently. But anyway, how I started was on a kayak trip in British Columbia, believe it or not. And the first hour I was on the water, a pod of orcas came right up to our boat and passed directly underneath, so close I could touch them. Now, that's the mightiest predator on earth, land or sea. I was so fascinated by the fact that I was still alive, I decided then and there that was a life-changing moment. I started taking classes, reading, educating myself, and decided I need to learn about other species. So the following year, I went down to Mexico to see gray whales, and I got hooked because they are the only actual friendly whales on Earth. And I'll make a point about these lagoons in Baja because I worked in one of the largest ones, San Ignacio. These are the only places on Earth where wild animals in their natural habitat routinely seek human contact. Well, that's a pretty major statement, but I have yet to find anybody who can contradict it. These whales don't approach boats on the open water, but they do in the lagoon because they know they're protected there. And we've come to know them personally. I know a lot of them I can identify them by their coloration, their scarrings, their prop strikes they've suffered. And I've come to know these animals on a personal level and interacted with them for many, many years. But it all started with an orca in British Columbia, and it ended up now with this book after 25 years of chasing whales all over the world.
So the different types of whales, we have the orcas, which are predators. We have the gray whales, which have kind of a long snout, I guess, and they're gray. And then you have the sperm whale, like the Moby Dick whale. What other type of whales are there?
Oh, well, there's sei whales, there's right whales, there are pilot whales. Like I said, there are 82 or 84 known species at the moment, and every now and then we discover them. There's 3 distinct species of orcas. There's transients, there's residents, and there's offshore orcas. So it's a vast community of animals.
And the orcas, do they actually hunt the grays as well as other whales, or
their preferred food is baby gray whale?
Okay.
What they will do is they will attack the mother whale from behind and try and sever her spinal column because her tail is a mighty weapon. If an orca attacks a gray whale, the gray whale is going to die. That's all there is to it. It can fight with its tail, but it won't win. But I've seen mother gray whales put a baby on their stomach to try and keep them roll upside down and sacrifice themselves to save their baby when an orca attacks. If an orca attacks a gray whale, it will get on top of the baby and drown it. That's how they kill it. If it's pretty well fed, it'll only eat the tongue and leave the rest of the carcass.
Do they attack in packs, or whatever, pods, or whatever you call a group of whales?
Yes, they usually attack in pods.
Yes. Okay.
And they communicate. They have a very advanced language system. If you're in a kayak, you can feel the vibrations through it when they're talking to each other as they coordinate their hunt.
Okay, so for whales, in general, do they all have the blowholes, and are they mammals?
They are warm. Yes.
Go ahead.
They are warm-blooded, air-breathing mammals. Toothed whales have a single blowhole. Baleen whales, like gray whales, have a double blowhole. But all of these animals 6 million years ago walked on the earth, and we know this because they still have a vestigial pelvic bone. And also there are ancient skeletons we call archaeocetes, where you can actually see the progression from when the nostrils were on the front of their face, just like ours are, and slowly over the eons worked their way back to the top of their head where they became blowholes to breathe as they evolved from land to sea creatures.
So how big are the gray whales usually, James?
A large one would be 45 feet and 40 tons. Females tend to be larger than males.
Okay.
And they have a 13-month gestation period, so they usually bear a calf every other year. And a female, barring complications, could bear calves for 40 years.
And what do the grays eat?
Mostly amphipods and krill. They are the only whale that is a bottom feeder. And they are right or left-sided, just as we are right or left-handed. What they do is they go along the bottom of the ocean on their side, and they scrape up tons of silt and sand in their mouth. They push out the water and the sand with their tongue, and the krill and amphipods gets caught on the back of their baleen, which is like a brushy filter. In fact, there's an old piece of baleen. This is what hangs down from the top of their mouth and acts as a filter. So then they scrape off the food with their tongue, and that's how they eat. But we know they're right or left-sided because the baleen on one side of their mouth is worn down more than another from years of scraping the bottom. And usually they are blind in the eye on that side also from rubbing through the sand so many years.
And how long do they usually live, James?
We think roughly 70 years. One female was documented at 90 years. We're learning about them every day.
Now, it's interesting that in your book you have some charts about their migration pattern, and I assume this has been going on for hundreds of years, if not longer. And they go up to Alaska and they come back around the West Coast, and there's some lagoons, I guess, like in San Ignacio, where they birth, and that's been going on for eons. So tell us about that, and how did you learn about that, or was that knowledge that was already known, and what have you been able to uncover, if you will, in the time you've been working with the Greys?
Well, when I first started, I took 5 years of classes in San Pedro, California at the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium to become a naturalist. And since then, I've worked on whaleboats for almost 25 years in Southern California, Central California. And besides that, in the lagoons, where I'm on the water daily with these animals, interacting with them one-on-one. They winter in the Chukchi and Bering Seas, northwest of Alaska, where they fatten up on all the food sources that are up there. Out of the 20,000 rough numbers we have along the Rim of Fire here, maybe 3,000 of those will migrate all the way down to the Mexican lagoons. There are three major Mexican lagoons. There's Scammons in the north, San Ignacio in the center, and Magdalena Bay in the south. There are also several smaller lagoons. And all these migrating whales end up down there. They start leaving Alaskan waters around December. And by the time that they're ready to head back north, it's about mid-April. Basically, a lot of them are having their calves during the migration along the route as they swim. They swim 24/7. They're the slowest swimming whales. They hug the shore. They navigate by underwater geography. Many of them are born along the way. Some are born in the lagoons. And if there are predators around when a mother's ready to give birth, she has the ability to delay that birth until she feels safe. They'll use natural obstacles underwater to hide in, kelp beds. They'll hide underneath boats. They're very inventive animals. But that's roughly a 12 to 14,000 mile annual migration. And they're basically doing this. Well, they are doing it twice a year, and they've been doing it for tens of thousands of years. The amazing thing, though, that I concentrated on in the book is the mystical connection people in central Baja have had to these animals for at least 10,000 years. Because we found numbers of painted caves in the mountains north of San Ignacio with whales on the walls that have been carbon dated 8, 9, 10,000 years ago. So these were used for religious ceremonies, and I'm trying to investigate the connection between these people and the whales that has been there for almost 10,000 years. Fortunately, now we're not hunting these animals. At least, I mean, some indigenous peoples are, and they don't take enough of them to affect the numbers. But commercial whaling against gray whales is not happening. For one thing, they are shore-hugging animals, so they're within the protected 3-mile limit and cannot be killed there. And well, the Atlantic stock has been extinct for some time due to overwhaling. The Asian stock is on the verge of extinction because of pollution. So the only gray whales left are here on the Western Americas along the Rim of Fire. And like I said, out of those, maybe 3,000 will migrate all the way to the lagoons in Mexico. And of those, maybe 300 end up in San Ignacio Lagoon. So these are the animals I've come to know. They come to the same lagoon where they were born year after year, and they come to know us as we know them. I've had whales approach me year after year, and I'm convinced they recognize me just as I do them.
How do they communicate? How do the Greys communicate with one another?
They can speak. It's a very low frequency. We cannot hear it, but there are recordings of it. And their ear is a tiny little hole behind their eye about the size of the nail on your pinky finger. But they do speak to each other.
Now, you say they're sentient beings, which I agree with. What are they? What was been like your biggest surprise when you learned about them as sentient beings? Because you see, most people see the big whale are in the water. You go on a whaling boat or whatever, and you take a look at them, and like, isn't that nice? And they come out of the water and they submerge again. What were kind of some of the aha moments, and what did you learn about them as sentient beings?
I think the biggest thing that struck me right at the beginning was how they are very proud to bring their newborns right up to us to show them off. Like, look what I've made. A mother gray whale will push her baby up to a boat, and sometimes she'll roll on her back and place it on its stomach. These are infants just like humans. And the purpose of the lagoons, they're nurseries. These whales have migrated thousands of miles to get down there. They've born their newborn calves. They have 4 to 6 weeks to get that baby strong enough to swim all the way back up to Alaskan waters. So basically, these lagoons are nurseries and training grounds. Mother makes the baby swim, swim, swim all day to build stamina. When the baby tires, which is quickly because it is an infant, they are rewarded by bringing them to our boats to play with us. We're bathtub toys to them. We've had whales push our boats around, spin us around. One big female came up underneath us upside down, put her pectoral fins around us and kind of picked us up out of the water a little bit. And so they let their babies come for a reward. They've been doing their job, they've been training. So mama lets them spend a little time at our boats and play with human beings. So we're bathtub toys to them.
Amazing. My special guest, Guys Radio, James Michael Dorsey. His book is called The Lagoon, and it's all about encounters with the whales of San Ignacio. And there's so much more in the book. You do some nice writing about Baja, California. For those who are not familiar with it, it is kind of a magical place. Tell us a little bit about that, because there's a difference between the northern section and the southern section. And of course, the fact that the whales come there to hit the lagoons.
Yeah, we believe roughly 6 million years ago, Baja separated from mainland Mexico through a cataclysmic volcanic eruption because it's still called the Rim of Fire. There are hundreds of active volcanoes in Baja. It's a moonscape. It's magnificent wilderness. Several mountain ranges run down the center of its spine. And it's just different than mainland Mexico. Mainland Mexico is resorts and tourists, and Baja is old world Mexico with donkeys and burros and adobe houses. It's a whole different world. And I talked about the indigenous people of Baja. There were three distinct groups of people, but the main ones I'm concerned with were in central Baja near San Ignacio. Those were the Cochimi people. And these are the guys that turned back the Spanish conquistadors. Baja was never conquered by Spain. Mainland Mexico was. But the Cochimi were hunter-gatherers and guerrilla fighters, and the Spanish would come on their heavily armored horses with their suits of armor and have to fight guerrilla fighters with bows and arrows, and they lost badly. So a lot of the inhabitants of Baja are direct descendants of these people, and they've been living in this desert environment for eons. And I've come to appreciate it in a way I never thought I could, because to me, it's the most beautiful wilderness I've ever seen.
And how often do you go to Baja?
Well, right now, I've only been going once a year since COVID. When I first started making these trips, I was going 3 or 4 times a year. I was guiding people down there. I retired from guiding about 2 years ago, just because I got tired of having to take so many people with me every time. I still return every year. And because the book has just been being published now, starting next year, I will be going down there annually to give lectures and to try and educate people about these animals and do book signings and things. But so this is an ongoing thing for me. It's part of my life, and I'll be doing it as long as I possibly can.
So just and we'll get back to whales in a moment, but if somebody wanted to go to Baja, what would be your recommendation for a vacation, long weekend, or whatever? Because it's very different from mainland Mexico, if you will.
Well, a lot of people drive. It's easy to drive there. There's only one major highway through Baja, and that's Highway 1 that was built, I think, in 1957. It's very narrow, and it runs all the way from Tijuana to La Paz in the south. There are two major government bus systems that are very good, and I've taken the public buses down there many times over the years. And a lot of our trips, we fly right into the lagoon in small planes. Baja is sparsely populated, and the south is, I think it averages 2 people per square mile as far as total population goes. And the largest city would be all the way south in La Paz. San Ignacio, which is the town that leads to the lagoon, has maybe 2,000 people in it. Its original name was Caracadam, which is a Cochimi name because it is a date palm oasis, and it's been occupied for at least 6,000 years. And that's the gateway. San Ignacio has become the central place for people to go to see gray whales. We get clients from all over the world there, and we have a permanent camp. It is there year round, although we strip out everything that's unnecessary in the winter and we store it because it's out in the middle of nowhere and we don't want it to get looted. And we reassemble the camp every year about December for the season, which runs December through April.
So right now, the mothers are giving birth now, or have they given birth already?
They've given birth. Right now, it's the end of the southern migration. Most of the grays are headed north. There might be a handful left in the lagoon, but most of them are on their way north. And when they're migrating south, the mothers will not eat. They can lose a third of their body weight. So it's not uncommon to see emaciated female gray whales. Once they get back up to Alaska, they will just do nothing but feed for several months, and they'll get all their weight back on. And that this is an endless cycle that has been going on for tens of thousands of years.
So, from what I read in your book, James, the whales have to develop a kind of a layer of blubber, if you will, so they can go up to and handle the colder Alaskan waters. Is that correct?
That's one reason they migrate, because when they're born, they don't have much blubber, and it's very cold in those waters. And the Mexican waters are very warm. And on top of that, these lagoons are highly salinic, much more than the open ocean, and that makes newborn babies very buoyant so that they don't have to work hard to swim. Gray whales are born with very little natural instinct. Mama has to push them to the surface for its first breath. Then she has to teach it how to eat. Everything that baby learns is done by mimicking its mother. And they nurse for 7 to 8 months. And after that, they're solitary animals for the rest of their life. They occasionally pod up, but rarely stay those pods together. They're solitary creatures. But a baby will nurse for 7 to 8 months. It'll gain up to 100 pounds a day on mother's milk, which is 52% fat, as opposed to a human milk, which is like 4% fat. So these are literally nurseries where these animals are being taught how to be a whale. They really don't know anything unless mother teaches them. If the mother dies before the baby is weaned, the baby will most likely die because grays are not known to adopt as other whales have done.
Now, what happens with the males? Where do they stay up around Alaska and the moms come down the coast, or do they come down together? Do they stay together? Is there a family unit?
No, there's no real family unit. After they mate, the males are finished. Now they will travel, and there are males in the lagoon, but primarily it's females and their calves. Mostly the males will stay outside the lagoon. We get a lot of juveniles in the lagoon for some reason, and we know this because they like to swim around in small groups, waving their 7-foot penises in the air. And this is a natural. This is a natural thing they do. And a lot of people have accused them of being homosexual, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. But we don't understand why they do these things. Sometimes they'll even intertwine their penises, and because they're 7 feet long and they're prehensile. But
amazing.
Mostly they're females that are in the lagoon. Yeah.
And the predators, again, I guess the orcas. The sharks, I would assume, are an enemy. And who do they not get along with, and who do they get along with? I guess porpoises, dolphins. How does it all work there?
Sharks will often attack whales, and they'll take small bites out of them. But like I said, they have a heavy layer of blubber, so it's not going to hurt them very badly. White sharks will probably attack a gray whale every now and then. As far as other creatures, they often interact with dolphins. I've seen dolphins interact with many different whale species. And there are also dolphins in the lagoon. They come and go. These are common dolphin, and they're quite large down in Mexico. They're bigger than the ones I see up in California. But There's a number of dolphins that interact with whales on a regular basis, especially they interact with humpback whales for some reason. But it's not uncommon to find dolphin traveling with whales.
Mhm. What do you do to study the whales? I mean, they go into the lagoon, they give birth. What do you study? How do you do your work?
I'm just on the water 5, 6 hours a day observing them. Most of
Hmm.
the lagoon is quite shallow. At its deepest point, it's about 100 feet. But these, being bottom feeding animals, they go into certain shallow areas where I can actually see them on the bottom and observe what they're doing firsthand. And when they scoop up everything off the bottom, they come up to the surface and they will blow everything out of their mouth except for the food source. And so we get splattered with this stuff when we're watching them. You know, it's whale spit coming all over you. And I get to see them firsthand doing this. They come up to the boats they open their mouths to have their tongue scratched, to have their baleen stroked. And these are very unusual behaviors. They will stand on their tail if it's shallow enough so they can spy hop, which means their eyes are on the sides of their heads
Hmm.
and they face down and out. So for that whale to see what's all around it, it has to raise its head up out of the water, and we call that a spy hop, where it rotates to see what's around it. Interesting thing is that these whales have a behavior that is also practiced by creatures up in the Arctic that haul out on the ice. When they look around, they will estimate how long it would take for a predator to reach them from the horizon, and that's how long they will sleep or let their babies sleep. Seals that haul out on the ice in the Arctic do this same thing. They have these built-in inner clocks so that they are not killed while they're asleep. And gray whales sleep by turning off half their brain, just like a dolphin. So they're always slightly awake. And the mother will only allow the baby to sleep so long. Usually it's just for a couple of minutes, and then it's back to let's swim, get you guys in shape. You got a long, long road ahead of you.
So how long, when a whale goes submerges, how long can they stay in their mammals? Can they stay underwater?
Normally a gray whale average 3 to 5 minutes.
That's
They
all.
can they can stay down a half hour if they wish.
Okay.
Other species like a sperm whale, they can dive for hours, but that's a whole different physiology that it's
Mm-hmm.
too complex to go into right now. Gray whales don't stay down that long, and they're
What is
not in that deep of water either, like a sperm whale, which can dive thousands of feet.
what's been like? What's the biggest misconceptions about whales and your biggest surprise while studying them, James?
Misconception. Well, until the 1970s, they were called devilfish, and people were afraid of them because back in the mid 19th century, when the lagoons of Mexico were first discovered, in fact, they were discovered by a whaler out of San Francisco named Charles Scammons, for whom a lagoon is named today. Actually, his brother found San Ignacio Lagoon and told him about it, and he came down there and slaughtered tens of thousands of whales. And because what they would do, they would harpoon baby gray whales. Not that they are good for a food source or for oil or anything. They would harpoon them so that they could bring the mother in close when she heard the baby's cries of distress. Then they could kill the mother. That's how they operated back then. So the mothers would use their tails and attack these whaling dories and smash them. And we don't know how many whalers died in these events. But because they attacked the whalers for killing their babies, they were labeled devilfish. The newspapers of the day picked up on this and promulgated that term. It really caught on for over a century. These animals were called devilfish, and people feared them. Uh, Naturally, I think it's ridiculous that they were given that name when all they were doing were defending their young. But this lasted until about 1972, which I write about in the book, when a Mexican fisherman named Pachico Mayoral claimed to be the first person to ever pet a gray whale. And it's a long story, but that evolved into modern day whale watching. And Pachico's passed on now, but he is world renowned as the father of modern whale watching.
That is unbelievable. Now, you mentioned earlier, James, about whale sounds and their low frequency, and I was reading in your book that frequency can travel across the globe. Talk to us a little bit about that and how, as humans and as a scientist, if you will, you can measure that. And is there any work being done to kind of sort out what they're communicating? Is it
There's a
feelings?
lot of research being conducted in the lagoon. The most of the main research was done on blue whales, which have the loudest voice of all, even though it is a very low frequency. There's a famous researcher named John Kellicombitis, who is the first one who documented that a blue whale can speak to another blue whale on the other side of the earth. We know that humpbacks can communicate over many miles. I don't know how far a gray whale can communicate with another gray whale. I don't think it's that far, and I'm not that knowledgeable. I'm not a scientist by any means. I'm just a very close personal observer who spent most of 25 years on the water with these animals. So I couldn't tell you how far apart they can talk to each other, but they do. And there's also a lot of body language. I've come to know what specific whales are going to do just by watching how they move in the water. And this is just from something of 25 years of observation.
Give us an example of that, James.
Well, like a gray whale, you can if they're traveling, they tend to be very methodic in how long they are on the surface or how long they're underneath. So I start timing a whale when I see it dive. And after 3 or 4 dives, excuse me, I can anticipate which direction they're going in, how long they're going to stay under, if they're going to approach us or not, things like that.
How do how do they get along with one another? They seem like, since they're peaceful with humans and they've kind of come to us, even though of the atrocities that humans have committed to them, do they get along as a group with one another, or is there any type of conflict there that you've noticed while studying them?
The only conflict I've ever noticed among gray whales is when they're mating. A lot of times, the alpha male is the one that will mate with the female, and a sub male will be underneath and help hold the female up while they mate. And sometimes there'll be other suitors waiting in line and they'll start pushing each other around, but that's as violent as they get with each other. The mating act itself can be very violent, where it looks like they're fighting, but they're not. As far as just openly fighting with each other, I've never seen that. I've never heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
The only real sea creatures that are openly aggressive towards each other and others would be Rizzo's dolphin. They're all covered with scars because they're constantly attacking other dolphins and whales and fighting amongst themselves. And I don't know enough about them to say why they do that. But other than Rizzo's dolphin, whales are peaceful creatures. In fact, with the different orcas, if transient orcas meet resident orcas on the open ocean, they'll go in separate directions. They have different languages, they have different dialects, they don't interact with each other.
It's just absolutely amazing. What's been your biggest aha moment while studying the grays?
Watching a baby actually being born, watching it come out of its mother and having her go down and pick it up on her rostrum and take it up to the surface. That was my aha moment with the gray whale.
Mm-hmm.
With orcas, I actually witnessed a funeral in British Columbia, and that was a pretty big one. It was such a rare occasion. I doubt that, I mean, most people doubted me when I wrote the story about it, that it was an actual whale funeral, but I consider it that. So those are the 2 big aha moments I've had with whales in general.
Tell us a little bit, and again, my special guest is the amazing James Michael Dorsey. His book, The Lagoon, Encounters with the Whales of San Ignacio, a lot of information on Baja, California, about the history of whaling, about the lives of the gray whales and the challenges we have to protect them. So if you could, kind of in a nutshell, talk about why whaling became so prolific. What was the resource that we got from the whale? I assume it's kind of the oil from the blubber, and how mankind has kind of, it's like with bison where we just ran them over the edge of the cliffs and stuff, and what has been done, and what was the tipping point in terms of beginning to realize that what the heck are we doing here, and kind of eliminating the killing of all these whales and the end of commercial whaling, And what are the new challenges that whales have today? Because I know there's a big salt factory, if you will, or repository down in San Ignacio, owned by Mitsubishi, and that's a challenge there. But give us a little bit of a background of whaling, how it's come to today, and what the challenges they have, and what are people doing like yourself to protect the whales going forward?
Ooh, that's half the book right there. Um, what they call the grand days of whaling were mid-19th century. Sperm whales were the preferred whale because they had these enormous heads that were full of oil. And this is what we used for oil lamps back in that time. And a lot of people ate blubber. A lot of people still do eat blubber, especially like the Japanese. They love whale meat.
Have you eaten whale meat?
No, I never have, and I never will.
Okay.
Just on principle. I mean, I've had it available to me, but I just will not do it. I consider myself a cannibal if I did that.
Okay.
Anyway, these whales were hunted almost to extinction because they were so slow swimming. They were easily killed. And it was sperm whales that were the preferred target of the whalers back then because of all the oil. But it wasn't just that. They used all of them. They used their body parts to make corsets for women and umbrella stays and just knickknacks. Every bit of the whale was. And then you have scrimshaw, which are whale bones and whale teeth, in particular, those of sperm whales, because they have huge teeth that sailors would etch and rub with lampblack to make beautiful little etchings. And this became a high art form. And so whales were killed for their body parts for many years. Gas lamps slowly replaced whale oil. Unfortunately, electricity replaced that. So it's been a measure of evolution over the years. But what saved gray whales from extinction was the Second World War, actually, because all these whaling nations from 1939 to 1945 had to cease whaling operations in order to kill humans. They put all the resources into fighting a war. In 1939, it was estimated less than 24 whales were migrating down the coast of California at that point because of overwhaling. At the end of the Second World War, nobody was really counting whales at that time, but people based on lived along the shore started noticing lots and lots of gray whales they hadn't noticed during the war. So he started counting them in the late 50s and realized they had made a huge comeback just from the cessation of whaling during those years. It wasn't until 1972 that the United States passed the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which says you're not allowed to invade the comfort zone of these animals. And since then, we've added more and more laws and regulations. The main thing is they don't have any teeth. Unless, the Navy and the Coast Guard is not standing by offshore there to say, hey, you're harassing this animal and we're going to enforce this. They don't do that. It's up to individual people to enforce these regulations.
So what are the biggest challenges for them now, James?
Well, there's so many whale watching companies. Every little town on the west coast of the Americas has a whale company, a whale watching group, and especially down in Mexico. And you're talking about tens of thousands of electric motors that these animals are very sensitive to. And you've got all this commercial shipping on the west coast, especially in places like the Channel Islands in Southern California, where there's a narrow corridor of shipping lanes that coincides with the migration path of the animals. Then you've got these giant ships that are 20 stories tall, and they have these big wave cutters on the front. Well, a whale that's swimming at 3 knots an hour, and you've got a ship traveling at 15 knots an hour that takes 2 miles to turn, we end up with a lot of whales being struck by ships.
Mm-hmm.
And I find them every year floating in the lagoon. They wash ashore, and 14 well, also because climate change is affecting their diets and their migration patterns. Last year, 14 gray whales washed ashore in San Francisco Bay, which was unheard of. And they were all emaciated because climate change has affected their food sources. They have to travel further to find food, and it's all a big house of cards. It's all interrelated.
Okay. How about the issue that you mentioned in your book about the salt in San Ignacio?
There is a major salt works in Scammons Lagoon.
Okay.
And this was owned part by a Mexican company and the Mitsubishi Corporation. A few years ago, Mitsubishi attempted to build a similar salt works in San Ignacio. That ignited a ground roots movement that I was very involved in. Hundreds of people descended on San Ignacio from all over the world. We had movie stars in camp. We had the literati of Mexico show up there. We had a Mexican president show up, Vicente Fox. And we generated a couple million emails within a week, and the Mexican government.
What was the issue, James, with the salt?
The issue was they wanted to build a giant salt works in the lagoon, which would have destroyed it as a nursery. The infrastructure that would have had to support such a massive undertaking would have meant roads and housing and noise pollution and waste elimination. They basically wanted to build a city in a pristine area.
Got it.
In order to get industrial salt. This was not salt for human consumption. It was salt for manufacturing of PCP piping. And for that, they were willing to destroy a birth lagoon that had been there for at least 10,000 years. So we had a massive outrage go after Mitsubishi. The National Resources Defense Council led the charge. And in particular, an attorney named Joel Reynolds, to whom I am eternally grateful. And we turned Mitsubishi around. And it's an ongoing battle to this day. Every now and then, somebody wants to come up and try and get this thing going again, another salt works, which is ridiculous. And there's also Japanese developers who want to put resorts right at the mouth of the lagoon. We've been fighting that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're doing great work. So my special guest, once again, Guys Radio, James Michael Dorsey. The book is The Lagoon. And thank you for all the great work you're doing. Where can people learn more about you, and where can they get your book and just learn more about the grays and all the great things you're doing to protect them?
My website is jamesdorsey.com. The book is being published by Diversion Books of New York. The publication date is May 23rd of this year, less than a month from now. It is available right now on any major bookseller on a pre-order. It is available in hardcover and as a Kindle. Later this year, it will be out as a paperback. But you can buy it almost anywhere, any major bookseller at this time.
Well, I can tell you from having read it over the past week that it's a terrific book, and it's got history, it's got some great photos, it's got your personal insights, and it's very easily digestible for somebody who doesn't know, like myself, anything about gray whales. And I really learned a lot. And I didn't even realize that they were sentient beings in terms of being mammals. I realized that that they're sentient beings, but I didn't realize that they were mammals and could only dive for X amount of time. And you really, we're so busy with everything. We don't think about some of these things. So people like you are heroic in doing the work to bring to our awareness the plight of these beautiful creatures on our planet. So thank you for the work you're doing, James, and all the best to you in the future. And thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak to your listeners.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys TV and Guys Radio, please support us by following and subscribing on all our platforms. Thank you.